After a high-stakes, productive meeting between Vladimir Putin and Middle East Ambassador Steve Witkoff, Secretary of State Marco Rubio now revealing that President Trump may soon be sitting down with Putin himself at Putin's request.
Hopefully, if things continue to progress, an opportunity will present itself very soon for the president to meet both with Vladimir Putin and with President Zelensky at some point here, hopefully in the near future.
And joining us now, Fox News contributor, host of the Hugh Hewitt Show, the one and only Hugh Hewitt. So, Hugh, let's get right to it. It's the two men at the table. It's the poker table of politics, and it's a dangerous game. Trump, Putin together. Putin asked for it. That's what the Secretary of State said. What do you think going forward? Does this really happen? Because I got to tell you, I'm skeptical when it comes to Putin.
I'm very skeptical, David, when it comes to Putin. Many presidents have tried to deal with Putin. President Bush, President Obama, President Biden, they got nowhere because he is, as Dick Cheney said, a KGB colonel at heart. However, I'm done underestimating Donald Trump. Given the last 6 months and all he's gotten done, I'm not going to underestimate his ability to bring home a deal that ends the Ukrainian war. The Iranians underestimated Donald Trump, and the B-2s showed up over their nuclear sites. So I think Donald Trump wants to go meet with Putin. He's probably the most formidable leader in the West by a lot. So if he sits down with Putin, maybe the sanctions on India woke up Putin to the fact his black market oil is going to dry up. Its market is going to go away pretty soon, and it will lead to a deal. But as President Zelensky said today, everything with Putin is about follow-through. He might promise the world, but he is a KGB colonel. He's a spy. He's a killer. He's a very tough man. So Donald Trump will not get taken to the cleaners by him. So I'm hopeful it happens because I'd like to see the Ukrainian war come to an end. But I am like you. I'm very wary of the dictator in Russia.
President Trump was asked about it at the Apple event today, and he said something. He said there was a good talks with President Putin today. There was a very good chance that we could be ending the end of the rat road, that bad road. But there's a very good chance there will be a meeting very soon after. So we'll see. Now,
reminds me what Churchill said, Dagan. It's not the end of the game, it's the end of the beginning. And so we've gotten to the end of the beginning, and I think that's a good place to be with Putin, but very warily.
But President Trump understands that our energy is our greatest sword and our greatest shield, and energy security is national security and also foreign policy. So turning to this, Israel-Hamas, the war. Secretary Rubio says more focus needs to be put on the hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. Listen to this.
There's a lot of attention being paid to the humanitarian, and we want to do everything we can to be helpful on the humanitarian problem. But not enough attention being paid to the fact that 20 people that had nothing to do with this are being held hostage in tunnels on the verge of death, and no real talk about how Hamas needs to be disarmed and disbanded.
And that was a point he made, that Hamas must be dismantled if there's ever going to be peace going forward.
He's right, Dagan. I have a column in the Washington Examiner today that is very blunt. President Macron of France is an accomplice of Hamas, as is every world leader who calls on Israel to do anything other than demand the release of their hostages. Tomorrow night at 6 p.m. Israel time, the Security Cabinet is going to meet, and I believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu will emerge in order to the IDF to occupy all of Gaza. It's very dangerous for the hostages, but they're dying in real time, and we've seen the videos of them being starved to death and digging their own grave. As someone said, Hamas is not just a terrorist organization, it's a sadistic, the most sadistic terrorist organization we've ever seen. They are bringing all this harm and injury on the people of Gaza. They have got the 20 hostages. They could end the war tomorrow. But if they will not do so, Israel saw with its own eyes, we saw with our own eyes, Secretary Rubio mentioned it, these people are dying in those tunnels. So the IDF is going to do what it has to do to try and save them, and at the same time eliminate Hamas. And I believe President Macron, Prime Minister Starmer, Prime Minister Carney, all these people who acted like morons when they said recognize a Palestinian state, basically told Hamas they were winning. They're not winning. Donald Trump's not going to let them win. Benjamin Netanyahu is not going to let them win. They're going to try and get those hostages back, and the focus ought to be on the hostages.
Amen. Amen, sir.
Absolutely needs to be. Let's move on to this, Hugh. You're calling on Trump and his team to address the abuse of the Endangered Species Act. It's harming a lot of our people in America, a lot of our businesses, especially our farmers.
Farmers, ranchers, people who want to build homes and apartments. The reason we have a housing shortage in many parts of the country is the Endangered Species Act. That column for FoxNews.com was part 1 of 2. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to lay out 3 executive orders I hope President Trump issues. One is to remove all the bogus species and subspecies from the list. When it was first published in 1973, there were 78 endangered species or subspecies. Today, there are 1,300. Most of them have been listed on a bogus criteria of projected future decline in their habitat. Just guesswork. It's not science. Second, compensate the property owners whose property is taken by these designations. When you get an endangered species designated on your property, you can't do anything to it. Crime to disturb them, even to nudge them a little bit. And then third, reduce the 9,000 bureaucrats at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service dramatically. Bring in new people who understand that the Fifth Amendment protects property rights. He can do it all with Doug Burgum and the new director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm hoping that he does.
I was smiling because that column, you've never had that quick a response from people, because folks, sea to shining sea, have had to deal with this. Family members of mine have had to deal with this.
You're right. Down in Florida, they got a lot of endangered species. Out in California, we have the Delhi Sands flower-loving fly, the Stevens kangaroo rat, the California gnatcatcher. People can't build homes, and we need to build homes and apartments. I know, it makes you crazy, and I practice law, and I'm retired from that now. For 27 years with these bureaucrats, they're not scientists, they're environmental activists, and President Trump and Secretary Burgum have got to put an end to it.
Love you, Hugh Hewitt. Good to see you.
Thank you,
sir.
Hugh.